So how many of you see yourself on a stage like this giving a talk? How many of you think that your story is ripe for that? Oh, I love that. I love that. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, that's why you're here. Or maybe you're still writing your story that you have to tell. And that's okay too. You're here to find people to, tell you which chapters to write. Or maybe you're still trying to figure out what challenge you want to tackle. And if so, this next panel is probably the best place to help you figure that out. Did you know that by 2050, cities are projected to add another 2.5 billion people? But as urbanization, industrialization, and consumption grow, the pressures on the environment and natural disasters are growing with them. Our panelists in the next panel will discuss how technology can contribute to building cities that can adapt to a greater variety of stresses and withstand shocks, such as climate change, pollution, and disaster risk. These are real problems that you and I are going to have to deal with in our lifetimes. And for those of us who choose to have kids, it's a problem that they're going to see front and center. Moderating this panel will be Saleema Vellani, the co-founder and chief operations officer of Innovazing, which partners with individuals and organizations to equip people to lead intentionally, turn ideas into action, and ignite real impact. Oh, that's music to our ears. Let's put our hands together for our panelists.
Hi, thank you. So, how many people here are from Africa? Awesome. And what about Asia? Latin America? Woo! Europe? Cool. And North America? Awesome. And tell me, how many of you actually live in cities? Okay, so that's most of us here. So, welcome to our panel. I just want to, tell you a little bit about, before we introduce the panelists, what brought me into this whole subject of smart cities and sustainable cities. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart because it actually started when I was in graduate school, and I was looking at how can Latin America learn from China, and how can we actually change the way we look at cities and stop this urban sprawl, and think about growing vertically and just try to learn from different countries and learn how to adapt, especially from taking learning from advanced economies, and how can we actually adapt some of these solutions to help cities in emerging markets where, according to McKinsey, that's actually where, in these emerging market cities, that's actually where there's the most opportunities to gain. And so I also want to share that I actually came to the World Bank, and it wasn't just to work on cities. It was actually to look at how do we reconstruct Haiti or Port-au-Prince after the earthquake, and develop the city in such a way that it can be more sustainable and resist future disasters. And it actually brought me to the current topic I'm working on now, which is, as an entrepreneur within the World Bank, how can we actually move away from traditional agriculture and grow food in cities by establishing more green rooftops and grow food in shipping containers? How can we grow vertically? And just really thinking about how do we collaborate with other sectors such as transportation, and really thinking how to innovate in order to address the pressing needs, such as refugees that are crowding cities. We have a lot of people just moving into cities, and we have to figure out how to meet the basic needs and think about the SDGs at the same time. So I'm really excited to learn from our panelists, and I'd like to introduce them one by one. We have a really diverse group, and we're going to be talking about all things from sustainable finance to technology and to collaboration. And so our first panelist I'd like to introduce is Alexandra Levin. She's here from New York. She's the Director of Municipal Debt Capital Markets at Citi Group. Let's welcome her onto the stage. And then we have Christina Wang, who's a Science and Technology Policy Fellow at USAID. And lastly, we have Stephen Rubinyi, who's actually from here at the World Bank, and he's a disaster risk management specialist. Bravo. And we were supposed to have another panelist, Leah, Lazer, who's a research analyst at Coalition for Urban Transition, who's up here, and she wasn't able to make it due to the snowstorm. So yeah, hopefully she's watching remotely. Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to have some fun with this, because I know this is the afternoon, you guys just had lunch. We're going to make sure this is going to be really interactive and engaging. And we're actually going to ask the panelists to give their elevator pitch, because it's really important to know how to do your elevator pitch, whether you're an entrepreneur, no matter what, right? And so we're going to give everyone the opportunity to, just answer, who are you, what do you do, and most importantly, why do you do what you do? So we can start off with Alexandra.
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Great. Okay. So I'm Alex Levin. I work at Citi, Citigroup, and I work in the Municipal Securities Division, where I've had a couple of different roles, but all relating to what's now referred to as social impact or smart city finance or urban tech. When I started, that was not what it was called. But that's become the name. And I've run our social impact private equity investing platform within Citi Community Capital, and now have a role within the Muni department where we are using data and technology to better connect municipal investors with municipal projects and priorities.
Hello, I'm Christina Wang. I'm an American Association for the Advancement of Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the U.S. Agency for International Development, also known as USAID. So at USAID, I'm the Environmental Management Advisor, and I'm helping to develop and implement the agency's first global strategy on pollution prevention and reduction. And I'm deeply passionate about sustainable development, which is what led me to USAID, specifically in this role, simply because I think it's the most daunting challenge confronting humanity. And so even though we all know that cross-sectoral solutions are critical to solving sustainable development challenges, enabling that and being able to see significant progress worldwide on cross-sectoral solutions has actually been quite minimal. And so I'm just deeply passionate and committed to trying to figure out how can we really enable those solutions to protect ecosystems, human health, and livelihoods now and into the future.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Stephen Rubinyi. I'm a disaster risk management specialist here at the World Bank. And why am I here? I'm here because I work with the City Resilience Program, which is a program at the World Bank that tries to tackle some of the issues that you guys have been discussing throughout the day. Fundamentally, the World Bank brings a lot to the table in terms of the financing, but it's something that going forward, I think there's been an acknowledgement that we need to do much more to think about how we can move from sectoral investments and sectoral planning to spatial planning. My background is in geospatial information. I'm still working on a PhD in spatial economics, and yes, the World Bank does hire young people. So what I'm really interested in doing is working with the youth, getting the youth inspired, and especially hearing your ideas about how we can integrate some of these solutions going forward that may be a bit more intuitive, particularly for the younger generations. Some of these transformative ideas on the ground, and working to integrate some of that into the World Bank's programming going forward.
Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. They're doing amazing work. So we actually want to hear a little bit more about what each of you are working on, and especially when it comes to technology and innovation. Some of you are working on some really innovative projects, and we'd love to learn a little bit more about if you can describe a specific project, particularly one that maybe has had a lot of impact or something that you think would be a really unique case study or something to share. And the way this works is anyone that wants to share, you can just start. We're not going to go down the line. So,
I guess.
Sure.
So at USAID, we're really just kind of launching our pollution work. A big part of it, and I'm hoping to hear from you guys, is that we want to find out new technologies and new approaches towards improving environmental transparency on pollution emissions. It's been very popular in Asia, for example, like mobile air pollution monitoring, such as, I'm not sure if you guys have heard of the company called Kaitera, which provides relatively affordable air pollution monitors that citizens can buy, and the data that literally generated by each person by putting these small air pollution sensors in their home helps actually improve air quality monitoring for the entire city. So we're trying to find out these type of new innovative solutions, also like air quality monitoring apps that forecast air quality emissions. I think this is very popular in Asia. It's not as popular right now in the United States, but I think it's growing in popularity. And so we're trying to figure out ways we can leverage these smart technologies to improve data monitoring, transmission, and translation.
Thank you. Who else would like to share? Yeah.
I'll go next. So we have a couple of different sort of quote unquote projects, but because I sit in the Municipal Securities Division, what we work on really more is sort of the overall financing or helping municipalities finance their projects or their priorities. So we've been working a lot on the development of sort of the green bond market, the social bond market. We actually just had a bond come to market that was helping to finance housing. It was in California. It was called the No Place Like Home bond, and it was financing supportive housing for formerly homeless individuals using sort of an innovative tax structure in California right now. It's just called the millionaire's tax, which is exactly what it sounds like. So one of our big projects is trying to take down those barriers between capital and ideas, and take down the sort of barrier to entry between investors and either green projects or social projects. The bond market and also the even just ETFs or the stock market has really had a sort of like a zeitgeist shift, if you will, I think over the past 5-10 years. And a lot of investors, they want that transparency. They want to know where their money is going, and they want to know that their money is going to support something that they feel good about, that brings some sort of positive change. And so I think one of the most important roles that we can be playing as a bank, and that we are trying to play as a bank, is not only serving investors by delivering things that they want to them, but by playing a role in that marketplace. So I think we're very focused on that, and even in our sort of private equity and efforts, we financed affordable housing all over the country. I think we're the lead and largest affordable housing bank right now in the United States, or lender in the United States, and we've financed venture capital that focuses on sustainable solutions. So I think we're trying to take solutions like you guys are looking at, and projects like you're funding, and help bring them to cities at scale.
Thank you. Can you elaborate a little bit more on collaboration and coordination and the importance of that? And perhaps when we're talking about multilateral development banks and like civil society, we have investors, impact investors, all these different actors and stakeholders.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, like you were saying, that's crucial, right? Like that's all of it. And the reason that I really became interested in this space was it was becoming clear to me as I was getting ready to leave college. I was a philosophy major, so shout out to anybody out there who's sort of more on the art side of things. But it was becoming clear to me that money was sort of this like energy force that made things happen or enabled things to occur. And so I wanted to understand a little bit more about how it moved and why it went to wherever it went. And I think that becomes really clear when you talk about partnership, right? Because you need a capital partner, you need government partners. I mean, in the municipal market, there's sort of this structural partnership where the government has put either certain tax laws into place, or either at the federal level or the local level, that enable private sector actors, whether they're developers or entrepreneurs or whoever, to come in and enables growth. But I think even if you're in a country where you don't have that sort of government structure, or you don't have that sort of tax support, I think you still need sort of government to create a space that enables growth, and you need people with capital to come in and facilitate projects, and then you also need sort of the visionary or the thought leader or the sort of content provider to have the idea. So partnership is crucial.
Thank you. Yeah. So when we hear about smart cities, oftentimes we hear about collecting data and sensors, and I was curious to learn more about what about measuring the impact of this? Like oftentimes there's a statistic that says that only less than 1% of data actually gets analyzed. And so I was curious to know who would like to comment on this and share some of their perspectives, and start with Stephen.
Sure, thanks. So I think that's a key point, is that in the modern age of information, there's so much data that it's often difficult to figure out what to do with it. How can we take that data and effectively translate that into information? And how can we take that information and translate that into decision making? So a couple of things that we're trying to do at the World Bank is we're trying to focus on staying on the cutting edge of technology for our clients, for cities in this space, and bring that to them. And this gets a bit to what we were talking about with partnerships. This isn't something that we can do on our own. We need to be up to speed with what's going on in Silicon Valley. We need to know what's happening with entrepreneurs on the ground, collecting information. So we have a lot of engagements, for example, with OpenStreetMap communities in different countries that we work. And then we need to find with that dialogue with our clients what information they need to effectively make those decisions. So, so one thing we've done, for example, is we've taken a lot of this open source, openly available geospatial imagery and tried to take that and develop customized tools that can inform decision making. An example of this would be with Sentinel-8. We took, I think, bands 10 and 11 and looked at urban heat island effects within cities. So this is ground temperature. And at a very granular level within cities, you can pick up, for example, in Saudi Arabia, just across a park, a dip of 8 degrees centigrade in the temperature on the ground. So that sort of information can do a lot to help to inform decisions that the city may take in terms of the advantages of green space, open space, city planning, and putting boulevards in place that have proper shade and can be more livable and human-centered.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share?
Yeah, so going off of what Stephen was saying, I mean, part of my experience, not only at USAID, but first I was a scientist, was I was working in China. And as you guys probably know, China is the leader, one of the leaders on the deployment of smart technologies. But when it came to urban planning and when it comes to sustainable development, what they started realizing was actually we need to invest in nature, right? So technologies alone can't really bring us the type of large-scale environmental benefits that we need. We also need to think about how we can think smarter in terms of how we're planning. So I kind of think smart cities is thinking about, hopefully we're going to use these type of technologies in part. You know, we need better data, specifically when it comes to environmental decision-making at finer resolutions across spatial scales. But it's really how we use that data, both in terms of what you guys are talking about, partnerships, cooperation, so coordination. And I really think when it comes to this, to all of us as a younger generation, it's this interdisciplinary thinking. I think that's so critical. I think what Stephen was saying, he's now getting a degree in spatial economics. I mean, that's incredible. I don't think in previous generations they would even have had that as a potential option. But I think it's that type of innovative thinking is what we really need. So technologies can help complement what we, our abilities, but it's how we think, at least in my experience, has been one of the biggest barriers in terms of moving sustainable development forward. And so I really hope that also we think about how we can also incorporate nature and ecosystem services. And for those of you who don't know what ecosystem services are, those are the benefits that humans derive from nature, and how we can use technology to support our environment.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually one other point on that. I think we were talking about this a little earlier, but I kind of feel like data is just how it enables communication. Like that's just a way that people can convey like what is actually happening. And it's a great way to do that, but it's not the only way. And we talked a little bit about educational outcomes and and I think that's important when we talk about, awareness of what's going on in ecosystems or in the environment, and kind of how communities develop, and the health of a community. But you don't have to have a sensor on a school to understand, how kids are doing. You can listen to the community. You can sort of like observe. Either test scores are sort of controversial, but there are a lot of other data points that you can look to. And also, I think you were talking about human-centered sort of design thinking. I think just listening to people and listening to what's going on in a community can also give you a pretty strong picture of what's going on.
Thank you. So we hear a little bit about human-centered design, and I actually teach design thinking and entrepreneurship, so it's a topic near and dear to my heart. And I actually want to dig deeper into that. And so, we see that a lot of cities, especially in emerging markets, they're trying to learn from some of the advanced economies, and oftentimes what works in certain cities, you can't really apply that the same way to another city. Just looking at Waze and Uber and different apps that are out there, they often have to be adapted and customized, or you really have to start from understanding the people, right? Like talking to the different stakeholders, understanding what are the problems, what are the needs before we start solutionizing. And so can we elaborate a little bit more on this topic of human-centered design and thinking about the future in terms of what is the future of sustainable cities, and especially with technology, how can we make these solutions more human-centered?
Yeah, well, so one example in some of the affordable housing projects that we've financed, we've seen developers really start to think about what the experience is to be a resident in these communities, and sort of this sort of catch-all topic of wellness, which is really important, but very hard to define. And so we've seen some of our developers, as an example, start to incorporate more natural light, community gardens, stairways that are sort of have more of a central role in the design, so that if people want to take the stairs, they're not hidden back in some concrete alley somewhere, that encourages people to move throughout their day and get a little more exercise. And so I think that there are a lot of ways that you can incorporate human design if you have people who are thoughtful about it and really paying attention to what an experience is like for the user. We've also seen some companies that there's a glass company actually that makes electrochromic glass that automatically will dim if it's too bright. The sort of initial thesis is that was going to be really great for energy savings, and companies were going to love it because they were going to save all this money. Buildings they were going to reduce their energy footprint, and what they realized was that is true, but the real reason that people buy their glass, or that companies or buildings buy their glass, is because the people who work in those buildings are just more comfortable, which again is not something you can really put a fine point on, except that you don't get people complaining about how they're cold. So yeah, I think there are a couple of examples.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share?
Just a quick example is, so I just spent maybe around 8 to 10 years working in China. And in China, a big part of it was they were trying to do this human-centered development, human-centered design, but at the same time, they didn't really communicate extensively with the community. But at the same time, their thinking was, well, if we can develop a lot of what Stephen was talking about, maybe parks, green infrastructure, you can get these multiple benefits specifically for quality of life, right? So this is a really new approach for at least China, thinking about urban design, about quality of life in terms of green space for exercise, urban cooling, potentially also reducing air particulates, carbon sequestration, et cetera, right? Water purification from wetlands, biodiversity. These are a suite of important benefits, right? But the problem is that several of the projects that I examined, they didn't work with the local communities. And then it ended up happening that they weren't actually getting the benefits that they were hoping, and at the same time, since they didn't involve the local community, the communities surrounding them didn't have the infrastructure that was necessary for such as indoor piping. So a lot of the sewage coming from the homes was going into these green infrastructures and overwhelming the system to provide those benefits that the government wanted, right? So I think what you are saying is so critical, is that discussing and working with local communities so that we can make sure that the technologies, or in this case, it was a combination of both gray infrastructure and green infrastructure, which are technologies, essentially, designing ecosystems for a suite of benefits, but they didn't work with the local communities. So it was an interesting lesson, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, one more. Yeah.
So I just wanted to highlight one more point coming from the perspective of disaster risk management is we often find within the cities that we work, there's this exposure bias, which we talk about, which is that the poor are often more vulnerable. They'll settle in locations that are more prone to flooding, for example. And this is something, these sort of spatial inequalities that we find within cities everywhere, you're not going to address these without understanding these communities, without reaching out to them, and without targeting them. And so part of how technology, how smart cities can help is with the targeting, but you really do need to have that complement of the community engagement on putting the plans forward, and on, I'm sure we'll get to this next, but the financing to back these programs that can actually help to make a difference.
Thank you. I was actually curious to learn a little bit more about, we have so many youth here in the room, and how many people here are entrepreneurs? Any entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs? Anyone working on a project to improve their city or want to? Okay, great. So most of you. So I was curious to know if you guys can comment on, and wherever you can from your expertise, how do you think we can involve our youth more when it comes to smart cities and urban planning and creating more sustainable cities, especially in the global south or in emerging markets? It's really interesting. So I talked about my work earlier and how, just with like simple solutions like hydroponics, it doesn't need to be the super sophisticated way of growing, using hydroponics, using PVC pipes and all these things over here, but how can we really use local materials and adapt and really think about how to involve youth, like thinking about unemployment, thinking about how to involve even women, thinking about different sectors at the same time, because sometimes we can specialize in our sector and then it can be harder to see. Maybe we need to open it up a bit and use some divergent thinking and figure out how we can collaborate with different sectors to be able to have more synergies with whatever we're trying to solve. And so I was curious to know if you can share your words of wisdom with our wonderful youth over here. What would you like to share in terms of what they should be thinking about as they start to solve some of their problems?
I'll go. That's a great question. I actually feel like we're kind of at this this great point where a lot of the barriers to entry to be involved in government or decisions that your city is making, or sort of the technology that your community is using, those barriers are starting to come down. I think that's because of technology. So I think it's for people who have a really great idea, it's not that it's easy, but it's easier than it has been in the past to get attention for that idea to, say, go viral or to get financing. I think that there are all sorts of different platforms, whether it's a Kickstarter platform or YouTube, for reaching out to people and connecting one-on-one with people, rather than having to go through sort of the more formal, like, a venture capital sort of a path, or a more formal pathway to connect with your ultimate customer. So, I guess my advice would just be, I think if you have a really good idea and you have a lot of faith in your idea, to stick with it and to think outside the box in terms of trying to line up your partners and trying to line up the facilitators for your idea and the capital for your idea. And if you can quantify how that's going to make an impact and ultimately find the people who will benefit at the end of the line, and connect with them and explain why they're going to benefit, I think I actually think that this is a great time to be having ideas and trying to start companies and new movements.
Thank you.
So I think the most important thing to remember is that every single one of you has the advantage of youth and the perspective that brings, and the fact that you grew up with certain technologies that others didn't. And that's something that's quite powerful, and that you really shouldn't underestimate. An example of how this sort of plays out is one of the first projects that I worked on. I was on a mission in the coastal zone of Bangladesh, and I was taking photos on my phone that had the GPS coordinates attached to it. Now, for me, that was something that was quite intuitive. It was something that I kind of grew up with smartphones, and I uploaded. I know where the picture was taken. But it's something that didn't necessarily come natural, because there were systems in place that had been established for monitoring, for evaluation, that relied on tried and true methods that had been up to date previously. And I think there's a lot of great opportunities for the youth in particular to look at how things are done and disrupt it and make it better. this is something where I think at a grassroots level, you should just sort of go for what feels right. I've been very heavily involved in the OpenStreetMap community, for example, and in Nepal, this was something that kind of kicked off well before the earthquake. And then when the earthquake happened, I can't tell you how valuable it was to have the information on the ground of where buildings were and the attributes tied to those buildings, and it actually helped in the response to the earthquake. So I think, from the side of the World Bank, as much as possible, we want to support and get involved with youth entrepreneurs. Youth entrepreneurship, that's the engine for growth within these cities. That's the way to tackle, whenever we speak to mayors, they say that jobs are the most important factor that they consider. So I'd say, just go for it. There's lots of networks to support you, and the World Bank, we're trying to support you as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, just going off of what both of you, what you guys had stated. At USAID also, we are a huge proponent of the private sector and private sector supporting the private sector. In particular, I would like to also see more youth engagement on that, and youth entrepreneurship, and us supporting young entrepreneurs. That's not really been an historic focus, but I think things are changing in our agency. At the same time, when I was just even doing the basic research and investigation on pollution in these new smart technologies, almost all of the companies that were created were all by young people. So, it's all of you guys. So I think you guys can have a huge impact. For example, I think the Air Visual, which is one of the most popular apps, I think it's the most now downloaded and used app for air quality around the world, and that's designed in large part by young people, right, and supported by young people. So I think you guys can have a huge impact. I'm excited to see the different types of solutions, hopefully, and also to hear your guys' questions. And I think the sky's the limit. I think we need you, and we need your ideas, and in large part we need your energy, and also the way you guys think. I think in large part what Stephen was saying, you guys grew up with these type of technologies, but also you guys come in it, and I'm hoping it's like more of an interdisciplinary perspective, so you guys can think across challenges a bit easier than the previous generation.
Thank you. Wonderful. Let's give a round of applause. That was amazing. So now we're going to turn things around. We're going to have a little bit more fun and engage you guys a little bit more, because we've been talking here for a little bit. We're actually going to, instead of me sitting here and summarizing the takeaways from this panel, we're actually going to have you line up, and whoever would like to share your name, where you're from, what was your takeaway, and how will you apply that in your city or your country, you can start lining up, and we'd love to hear from you before we jump into Q&A. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mike. All right, my name is Theo Sharp, and I am originally from Ghana and Liberia, currently based in Berlin. My takeaway mostly is this whole idea of, I know you mentioned trying to innovate from where you are. So my question to all of you on the panelists, based on your different jobs, as you see these new innovations and new partnership, you are in certain organizations with clearly defined goals and objectives. So how do you push innovation and this whole idea of entrepreneurship from within your organizations as you have these clearly defined goals? So how do you foster entrepreneurship from within?
Thank you. Okay. We'll hold on to that and then just keep moving on with takeaways. So you don't always have to have a question. It's more to share takeaways, but we will get to the questions soon. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, okay. Hello. So my name is Riwal Mastri. I'm from Lebanon, and I work as a behavioral economist. And I think one of the key takeaways that was mentioned that is specifically targeting at least my field of work is the importance of taking a human-centered approach to any kind of policy design. So sometimes you look at data and you think that they are representative of the sample that you're looking for, but actually it's not. So it is really important to test and see and measure the perspective of the individuals, of the citizens that are in certain area, of why, for example, poor people do live in this prone to flooding area and so on, and see what are their views, their takeaways, and leverage policies and programs that are able to take this human-centered approach to them. So I think this was one of the key takeaways.
Thank you.
No question.
Hello, everyone. My name is Meenakshi. I'm from India, and my takeaway from this very interactive discussion, I mean, first of all, it is such a diverse group, and I've always find myself in a position, I really like disaster risk management, and I've worked in it, and I really also enjoy that how we can build up our own communities, and how the culture and communities play a significant role in it. So my particular takeaway is that how these things sort of seep into each other and connect within each other, and how the behavior economics and the infrastructure of the entire policy decorum kind of reflects. And it is not only about connecting dots forward and or backward, it is also to think and be prepared for what could be the future challenges, and how the innovation that we are doing today in today's world, because of the problems that we have had faced in the past, we can build more upon it, and not only enhance its own capacity, but then also take lessons from it and integrate different industries to come up with something more bigger, which can not only prevent the problems, but also co-create solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Meenakshi. Yep.
Hi, my name is Gifty. I'm from Nigeria. My key takeaway in this session has been how to use technology to support the ecosystem, especially in a continent like Africa, where majority of the people are local farmers. How can we use technology to support building sustainable cities or smart cities?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sasha. I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia. And one of the key takeaways that I got from this session was Alexandra's idea about money as like an energy source or force of energy. As a young person and as a young entrepreneur, I often feel like I don't have a lot of leverage in situations because I lack money. But when I view it as an energy source, I kind of realize that it needs to go somewhere, and that's just kind of a new way of viewing how I might display my projects or my ideas as something of value.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Crystal Poo. I have a question for Alexandra. So you mentioned how the budget being able to finance is a very important criteria of implement different programs. But from my observation, what happened on the bond market is all the public sector clients keep refinancing their bonds, and they're showing a very heavy debt service fees. So my question is is there a solution where they will be able to continue their programs while also lessening their burdens from the need of the debt service fees?
Go ahead.
Great question. So you're right. A lot of municipalities or even companies are refinancing. I don't know how many people are following the financial markets closely, but interest rates are sort of at historic lows and have been for a little while. And so what you start to see is companies who need to borrow money for the long term, or municipalities need to borrow money for the long term, have been borrowing lots of money and have been refinancing debt that they previously had that was maybe at a higher interest rate. So, if you had borrowed money previously at a 6% or something, and now you can borrow at a 4%, a lot of borrowers are starting to refinance or have been refinancing. And so that does come along with having a debt service burden. It's sort of like having, I guess, a mortgage on a house. So you do pay interest for that. But what it does is it unlocks capital and it enables you to make moves you need to make now. So, for, let's call it transit systems who have several $1 billion of repairs that they need to make, or improvements, or new lines they need to build. If they want to be able to do that now, they can sort of amortize that cost going forward over the long term. And ideally, if they're being thoughtful about it and if they have the right financial partners, ideally bankers who are helping them to think through it, you do that in the smartest possible way. So if the fees you have to pay up front or the interest that you're paying over the long term is unsustainable or is not better than what you already have, typically you won't find groups that are making that decision, but you will find like a government or a transit authority or a water authority taking advantage of interest rates now to borrow money so that they can spend it. Maybe interest rates are going to go up in the future, but now they have a pile of cash that they're able to spend to keep their services going. So, again, ideally they're thinking with that longer term view. And sort of using revenues that they might have coming over the next few years or next several years to be able to cover that. It's a really good question.
Thank you. Okay. Well, we don't want to forget about our first question on how can entrepreneurs be more involved or collaborate with organizations? Is that correct?
No, I said, how do you innovate from within?
Okay.
Your organization has very defined objectives, but how do you create change from within in your respective positions?
Okay, so sort of like entrepreneurship. Okay, so the question is on how can entrepreneurs or people that are aspiring entrepreneurs, how can they actually create change, or how can organizations incentivize that? Who would like to tackle that one?
Well, so I'm actually relatively new to USAID, but I have learned about, we have this thing called the 5-point framework, right? And so we want to work across these 5 different points. I think your question is saying how, as an individual, I can try to bring around institutional change within my organization, but also we want to think about how we can try to create systemic change in a country, right? So the 5 points are this. One is enabling conditions. The second is finance seekers. The third is finance providers. The fourth is the financial infrastructure. And the fifth is what we call disruptors or facilitators, which might be actually you guys, like people who bring in these really new radical ideas. And I think part of what I can do to try to bring about change in my organization is try to, unfortunately, this 5-point framework isn't always utilized. And why we say that is that at USAID, we work across all 5 boxes, right? So we want to try to work with, since we also represent the US government, we can work with host governments to bring about legislative change, right? We can work also with the World Bank and other donors to try to link finance seekers with finance providers. We can also try to help build the financial infrastructure through our investments, right? So we want to work across all 5 boxes. Unfortunately, we don't always think that way, and also work with you guys like new innovators. So I think part of what I want to try to do is to try to bring about sustainable investment, which is what you guys are all talking about, which has kind of been a challenge in USAID, is how we can try to work across these 5 boxes, maximize our investments to bring about system-wide change.
Thank you. Okay, we have a few more questions. We have 4 minutes left, so if you can just state your name and your
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm from AARP International, where we deal a lot with lifelong housing issues. So my question is for Alex. Essentially, I imagine many of you know that young people have a difficulty affording homes today in tight housing markets. One of the challenges is older adults often staying in a large home that they no longer need, and that is often because there are no other options in the community where they've lived and where they're comfortable and they have neighbors and friends. And one of those challenges is that there's no, sort of local regulations and other challenges. But another challenge really is on the finance side for these other options, sort of accessory dwelling units, for example, sort of second units, that often bank lenders won't take into consideration the value of the home plus the unit in thinking about lending, or even in a sort of multi-generational housing, which has a tremendous number of benefits, both in terms of cost savings, but also caregiving, older adults taking care of younger children, younger people taking care of older adults. In fact, 25% of caregiving is done by millennials in this country. So, but in that case, lenders often won't consider the combined resources of those different generations in making lending, so that people are shut out from home ownership. So I'm just wondering what your thought is on that.
Yeah, and I'll try to be brief. So there is this sort of silver tsunami that people talk about, particularly in the housing industry. I think what you're seeing is there are definitely technologies that are coming into place that sort of help people age in place, help them stay in their homes. And I think what you're also seeing is that there's sort of this wave of development aimed at people in these kinds of situations. The lending question is a totally separate question about how you sort of combine finances and get a loan or tap the financial market with sort of a non-traditional sort of finance structure. I think that probably what you'll end up seeing is if there is indeed a need and sort of a white space there, you will end up having companies that come in and facilitate a change. It's kind of what we've seen with like peer-to-peer lending. It's what we've seen with even Uber on the transportation side. That's a very truncated answer, but I have hope for technology and coming in and solving that issue for people. It's a very real space for sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Saleema and I'm from Lebanon. I'm a student. It's a very simple question. Stephen, you said something very fascinating. Actually, I found it very interesting, and I would like you to tap more onto it. You mentioned about the shift between, if I'm not mistaken, the shifting from a sector investing to spatial investing. And I would really want you to just give more information about what do you mean by that. Thank you.
Okay, so briefly, I think that, for us, we came to this by thinking about the urban infrastructure financing gap, and you need to do more with less. And part of doing that is helping cities transition from being a bit reactive in their thinking, which is, oh, the city's building this way, we need a metro line, we need services, we need all of this stuff, to thinking much more holistically around how our city's going to develop moving forward, how we can influence that development, and how the investments that we make can be planned strategically so we can make the most out of those investments. And for me, we mentioned spatial economics. To me, that's, economics for visual learners. And so looking at cities from that spatial perspective comes quite natural, and I think it's something that we're trying to encourage moving forward. But the one caveat to this is when you're thinking about this, you can't just think about one sector. So you need to think a bit larger in terms of the investment portfolio that's required to get things done, because you can't have complementary investments without all of those different investments and all of those investments coming to fruition. So this is again where the partnership side comes into play, particularly on financing with other MDBs, with the private sector, and so on. So thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kruti. I work at GIZ on climate change and cities in Africa. My question was actually really similar, so I'm going to tweak it a bit. So one of the things that we work a lot on is climate change adaptation at the city level. And the biggest challenge there is the lack of financing for adaptation-related projects, even planning for that matter. So how do you do your risk assessments and vulnerability assessments? I would love to hear if there's, other than getting grants, what are some innovative ways to finance climate change adaptation at the city level?
So one thing I just want to mention quickly is, on the adaptation side, what we're trying to explore is a number of different financing mechanisms where we can potentially look into crowding in private sector resources. One buzzword that we've been talking about a bit in this space is land value capture. So when you have a public investment, particularly around, say, flood risk in a river, the prices of the land will increase because they're no longer in flood-prone areas. So this is where we talk about that exposure bias. So you can often sort of hit two birds with one stone here, where if you can find a way to capture as a city some of the increased revenues at a very basic level from property taxation, or look a bit even more forward with things like self-development rights, other mechanisms, even going in developed markets to thinking about TIF bonds, then you can start to think about more innovative solutions around that space and shift from thinking about it as a liability to an opportunity for the city to actually increase its own revenues.
Thanks. Here, we're out of time, as if you can make it really brief.
Yes, I'll try to do it as fast as I can. Sometimes I talk too loud, fast, but for Alexandra. I'm from Mexico, Juan Carlos, but I'm currently based in New York, getting my master's at Columbia University. So I have seen like the gap sometimes in like infrastructure and how people like get it. Do you have like examples from Citigroup that they're like investing maybe in developing countries where maybe it's not that easy for like the public sector to pay for big infrastructure like trains, subway lines? I just wanted to know about that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Great question. So most of my experience happens to be in the US. I know we are doing work internationally that is not in the muni market or sort of in the social impact side of things that I was working on. I do know we've worked on transportation options. I know we've worked on, we have a whole renewable energy and energy efficiency finance team that has financed projects all over the world. So I think, financing infrastructure, particularly sort of around smart cities, is just something that people are starting to do as sort of a normal course of business. Again, I think it kind of circles back to our earlier point. I think it's something that a lot of attention is on it now, and so it's being labeled differently, and cities, I think, are realizing the urgency of dealing with a lot of these issues, whether it's crumbling infrastructure or climate change. But it's just for cities who deal with that is just good governance. And now it's called, it has these labels on it, but it's the same kind of sort of municipal finance or government finance that cities have been doing and should be doing just in their regular course of business. So the short answer is yes. For more details, I'm happy to talk afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. And yeah, we really appreciate all your answers, all your expertise, your advice, and thank you to everyone that shared their takeaways, their questions. We will be sticking around. I know we have a short break, so if you have any specific questions, we'll be around here for a few minutes to answer. Thank you so much.
Wow, you guys asked some good questions. Sorry, we need you to just stay here for just a little longer. Let's give our panelists another round of applause. Those were great questions, you guys.